We're live, and welcome all Fast Turn radio watchers, listeners, replay catchers. Tonight, we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, and we have a little co-host here for the beginning. And we are going to kind of cover a bunch of topics. But before we get to some of the bigger topics, my daughter wanted to share what she thinks some of the things she got in the mail from Toys R Us, right? So what did you want to tell everybody? Oh, it's back to school. So it's so it's partially on topic. But as Diana says, this is True Thursday, right? So you get the 10% off on Thursday. So Leora, you got to tell them, what are you telling them? You want them to see this? What should they do? You have to hear you talk. You're not going to hear anyone, so just talk into the thing. Oops. Okay, just talk. They'll hear you.
So these are all the bags that they have.
Mm-hmm.
There's even more.
Okay.
And there's also some more things.
There's more things here. Tell them about what you want to tell them about here. What is that?
These are happy places.
For Shopkins.
And
do you think that's a good product? Is it going to be a good product? You have to speak.
These are good products.
Okay. All right. So we're going to bring you back when we get to Q4, okay?
What's Q4?
Later. It's the holidays.
Yay.
Okay. So tonight, wanted to talk about a bunch of different things. And, I know Dwayne's show that we're covering here. So it's called Fast Turn Radio. So Dwayne started out that he was all about the fast turns, and that's how the concept began. So this summer, as I filled in for him, some of you who are listening to this are here live. I appreciate everyone who's here live, but some people have reached out because they know nothing about me or my business, which is totally fine with me. But at the same time, what I tried to do over the summer was bring on a bunch of different guests, some of which talked about fast turns in different ways, right? So last week we had the wholesale guys, we had Dan and Eric, we've had Andy who's doing private label, but that can basically become your own fast turning product. We had Steven Peterson who talked through a lot of other sellers things, and he talked about your business and learning really what you don't like and kind of avoiding it. So I was thinking that, and we had Sam Cohn who kind of talked about things in volume as well. So what I wanted to do was, one of the first topics I talked about was long-term storage fees. And that is obviously coming up August 15th. So you have about 12 days left. You've probably have begun to see some pricing pressure on some of your items that may be bound for long-term storage fees. And the reason for that, right, is everybody has realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to pay these exorbitant fees, and they didn't get ahead of the curve, and now they're trying to dump the product. So in looking at this, like, one of the things we talked about was kind of understanding how much you're going to pay per piece to keep it there. So the real question becomes, does it make sense to dump it, or, and it didn't have to be dumped. It could have just been, selling it earlier. Or does it make sense to kind of hang on to it and pay the fee? So it really depended on how much the current buy box was relative to what you're going to net, and then how much you're going to have to pay. So if you have something that's going to cost you $8, then you really want to understand, like, how far out of the buy box are you, and is it ever going to see that price, right? Just because you're asking $100 for something and the current price is $40 doesn't mean that it's ever going to see $100 again. Markets change. So if you haven't done this yet, I strongly suggest you go into Seller Central, you go into inventory, go into, I think it's called Inventory Dashboard. You check out, I think it's the first show I did, which I think was June 29th or so. And I kind of show you how to get the report. But if you go into Inventory Dashboard, there's an aged report, very simple, and it kind of tells you what you're going to pay on each item. So you definitely want to take a look at that if you haven't. Hopefully you've already been doing that for, a few weeks already. I know that since I've started in June looking at that, I'm down probably about now $1,800 less in fees. So definitely accomplished what I wanted to accomplish on that. So here we are, and now we're in August. You look at the calendar and you say, all right, how much is left how much time do I have left for different things? So we're going to talk a little bit about back to school now. So back to school, depending on where you live in the country, your kids may already be going back to school. I've seen people posting pictures of their kids going back to school already, which is a little bit crazy to me, only because here in the Northeast, nobody goes back to school until after Labor Day. So there's another month of summer here. And as you just saw, my daughter, she went swimming today, and basically everybody's still in camp. So depending on where you are, people are shopping for back to school. So I wanted to kind of, I touched on it a couple episodes ago, but most of my back to school products are either there already or on their way. But it's not too late to get your stuff in, because I would say you can see sales through the third week of September. So if you're thinking you missed out on it, you may have missed getting wholesale orders done, and maybe you still can. I know actually we just placed one more at the beginning of this week, so we'll see how that kind of plays out in terms of timing. But there's definitely still time on the clock to get sales in and to get product in there. So in talking about back to school, one of the things I had talked about was thinking about things peripherally, right? So everybody, when they think about back to school, the immediate thought is backpacks, lunch boxes, and then all these school supplies, whether it's pencil cases or bundling all these different things together. But there's a whole lot of other things that you can be thinking about. So first and foremost, depending on how old your kids are, or if you have kids at all, there are certain things that you probably don't think about. So you will probably see a fairly large uptick in things that relate to bedding and rooms. And it's not the natural correlation to think, oh, school's back, I'm going to sell more room product. But the reality is that back to school includes college, and you have dorm rooms, and you have all the things that relate to dorm rooms. So whether it's bedding, whether it's just accessories for the room, whether it's things that people like to, when you got your first apartment, think similarly when you moved into a college dorm, or whether you moved to an apartment at a college, all these things are things that you could be thinking about. They should see upticks. And the way to know this, to be thinking about it, is really looking at the historical ranks this time of year, right? So let's call this more seasonal selling. You'll see items where a month ago or so, the rank probably was not great. And if you look, though, now the rank may be improving. But if you go back 12 months ago, you'll see that the rank was actually really strong. Those are the kinds of things that now you may be late for this year, things to pay attention to. But at the same time, it kind of talks to one of the other topics for tonight, which is the rest of the year, which kind of goes to fourth quarter goals and the lessons learned. So before we kind of get to that, when I was thinking about the long-term storage fees and all these different things in terms of moving your inventory, one of the interesting things that I noticed was trying to look at my long-term storage fees and try and make takeaways from that. So when you have inventory that's not moving, obviously you want to recoup the cash and you want to get it out. But at the same time, the other thing to think about is what can you learn from this process? Because ultimately your business is going to get better if the less mistakes you make. Now, we're all going to make mistakes. You're going to have bad buys. But what happened, right? So you go through your long-term storage inventory and you say, why didn't this sell? Well, some of the things you may find were actually like Black Friday items that you bought because you thought they would sell in Q4 and you never ended up selling them, and they've been sitting there for almost a year now. Some things may be things that you bought in, the late winter and you thought we're going to sell over the summer. If something is not selling, you really need to analyze what happened, right? Like look at the source at where you bought it, look at what you paid for it, and then understand like where the market is today. So if you bought flip-flops back in February and there was, you were paying $20 thinking that you're going to sell for $40 or $50, then, understand that where the market is now, if you're not able to sell these things, what was the challenge? Was it that the market said, no, we would never pay $40 or $50 for this? Or were there other sellers selling them for 35? Was there another source that was, clearly blowing them out later in the year? So you probably should have dumped them. I shouldn't say dump, but you should have tried to sell them earlier in the summer or the spring. So these are things to really take a look at and learn from. So when you're going through your business, there's lots of ways to run your business, and some people are in for the let's call it medium to long term holds, or some people are into the want to turn things over. Like we had Dan and Eric last week. They're all about velocity. It's just a turning business. But if you're looking at stuff that you're now paying long-term storage fees, you definitely want to understand like what was the cause of that? Like why are you, potentially paying a long-term storage fee? What could you take away from that? Because at the end of the day, you don't want, even if you have one of something, you really don't want to be sitting on this inventory just because it's what I would classify as dead inventory and you want to monetize it. So take a look at this stuff, even the stuff that you're not going to pay long-term storage fee, whether it's just one unit or it's something that's there like, just under 6 months, it's there 5 months. Understand like why it's not selling, because it may be that, hey, it was just, you didn't pay the right price, you didn't price it right, but it may be that the product wasn't good, and learn why it wasn't good, because that will prevent, future issues for you down the road. So, I think that's one of the reflection points that, like when Stephen Pearson talks about, learning things you don't want to be doing, that's critical to the overall business. But before you head into the back half of the year, I think it's a good time to, hey, take a look at what you have, what you've done right, what you've done wrong, because most people know what's selling in their inventory, right? You go through your sales every day and you're like, oh, I'm selling this. But most people don't know what's not selling. So if you have inventory labs, there's lots of ways to kind of go through that stuff. But if you don't, you can, if you go into Seller Central and you go into your inventory, you can sort your inventory. When you go into manage inventory, you can sort it by date created. Now, if it's a replenishable, that's going to kind of send the whole thing out of whack. But if you're doing like these one-off or 3 or 5s of things, it'll show you when you first created that listing. So that may be helpful. You may want to put your dates of when you send something in the MSKU. I do that for certain categories. So these are things to think about. And now when you're going through your inventory and saying, hey, why isn't this selling? It may have been a bad buy. It may not have been, but you want to know what's still out there, because what happens is as you get to the back half of the year, depending on your business, you may be picking up multiple hundreds of new SKUs. And one of the biggest challenges with specifically the fourth quarter, but definitely this business, is SKU management. If you could sell 20 SKUs the whole year and make the same amount of money as selling 800, you definitely would take the 20 SKUs because it's just a whole lot easier. So when looking at this, even if you have like 1s and 2s and 3s of things, and they've been there for 4 or 5 months and they're not selling, maybe you bought them with the intention of selling them later, but pay attention to them, because first and foremost, you do pay storage every month, even if you're not paying the long-term storage fees. Second of all, if it's out of sight and out of mind, you may completely forget about it and it's just sitting there. Third of all is the new November, December storage fees. So we touched on this earlier, in when I was sitting in for this stuff, so late June. But basically, the new storage fees are roughly on the non-oversized, but on the regular size stuff, you're basically going to be paying 3x. So if something is there on November 1st, and then that same something is there on December 1st, you will pay, instead of, I think it used to be somewhere around 72 cents for the fourth quarter per cubic square foot. Now you're going to pay about 225. So literally 3 times the price. The oversized goes up, but it's not as big of a multiple, but it's still a lot of money. So their objective is to have you have product move. So this new fee, though, is also not just on, someone asked a question in one of the groups where I posted for tonight's show. They asked, do you pay per item? Meaning, in long-term storage fees, if you have one, they don't charge you on that one. But if you have two, they charge you on the second one. For this new fee, my reading of it is that you actually pay on all the units you have there. So even if you just have one of something, you're going to pay for that unit. So I'm actually going to try and, I think I have a link. I posted it. I think it was actually in ScareMonkey. But I'm going to post the link to the rule here in the chat. So basically, this is Amazon's new policy for November and December. In October, there are a few minor changes. They're reducing it, because normally October, I think you went to like 72 cents per cubic square foot, and now it's going down to 54, which is what you pay January through September. But, so keep that in mind. So when you're going through this inventory now and you're kind of cleaning house or cleaning up or taking a look at, winners, losers, and mistakes or non-mistakes, definitely take a look and see, because if something's not going to sell in November, you're going to actually get dinged pretty significantly. And these are things that people don't pay enough attention to. So again, thematically, things that we've talked about, know your numbers. So this goes to knowing your numbers. What are you truly making? Well, if you're paying, $225 for the month of storage on that one item, that may have a big impact on this thing. I don't know. Like you should know your business, but these are things to kind of be thinking about. So, in thinking about that though, kind of when you're thinking about the back half of the year, we talked about some of the holidays, we've talked about some of the seasonal buying, but the themes really should be around knowing what you want to do, right? What your goals are, what you want out of this business. And, we kind of talked about this is all about you. It's your why and your objectives. But the key to this, something that I noticed a lot of people have never really thought about, is because I get a lot more questions now, is, well, how am I going to hit my sales goals? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And one thing I thought about is that, I think people forget, in order to sell items, you have to buy items and you have to ship them in. So there's a two-part to this, right? So if you see a slowdown in your sales and you're like, I don't understand, why all of a sudden things are falling off a cliff, it makes a lot of sense logically, in the sense that you have all your, let's call it, better inventory, and you don't send anything else in. So slowly, you're just going to be selling off your good inventory, and you're going to be left with what let's call the dead inventory, or the stuff that's priced out of the buy box range. And your sales are going to stop. So you need to be deploying capital. This business requires you to buy in order to make sales. So if you're thinking, hey, I want to have a bang up, huge home run of a Q4 holiday season, you need to ramp up the buying. If, obviously the velocity on the website picks up tremendously, and sales are probably 3x of the daily volume. But you have to have 3x the product as well. If you're selling something one a day and all of a sudden you're selling 3 a day, you're going to sell out that much faster as well. So again, thinking about these things, knowing how much money you have at your disposal to use and deploy, as well as understanding that if you want to be selling, let's call it $1,000 a day or $10,000 a day, whatever your number is, you have to be spending in advance that much money as well. Like, obviously you want to be buying at a profit level, but the point is if you're not stocking up relative on a ratio basis, you're not going to have inventory to make those sales numbers that you're trying to get, because you can't bank on the fact that the, let's call it, over retail, over MSRP game will apply to everything you have. You can't expect that everything you go and buy in the store for $10, you're going to sell for 30 or 20 or whatever the number is to you. You have to start recognizing you're going to actually need to generate sales off of purchasing items. So be thinking about that now, thinking about, okay, I have to spend money. Maybe I want to put myself on a weekly spend budget, not, oh, I want to have, X number of sales a day, but I need to spend X number a day or X number a week or X number a month for these next few weeks or months in order to actually have product there to make those sales numbers work. I think that's something that people forget about. And then when the sales aren't there, they can't understand why they didn't have it. And part of it is they just didn't have the product. So now is the time to be looking at these, historical, let's call it, charts, where you see, all right, the specific seasonal item that doesn't really sell very well throughout the year. It sells okay, but it sells phenomenally well in the holidays. Now is the time to be, looking at those things, placing those orders and getting out ahead of it, so that if you don't want to be doing this RA rat race type of thing, you don't have to. These are the things that you want to be getting ahead of and thinking about beforehand. There was a related topic that I did not write down, but it's slipping my mind. But it was just another thing that was totally correlated to that. But anyway, it'll come to me later. In wrapping up the back to school, one of the topics that I think is also another two categories that really fit very well is shoes and clothing. So as the kids go back to school or the young adults go to college, they need new clothing. Hang on one second. Sorry. So, everybody wants a new wardrobe. People want to allow them, the kids who are in high school want to go and have a new first day outfit or whatever it is. College kids are going to need new clothing. Younger kids are growing. School, has different dress codes. So maybe they require you to go get new stuff. So all these things are big. So shoes and clothing is definitely something that sells very well heading into back to school. And it also sells well in Q4. As some of you may or may not know, I do sell a fair bit of shoes and clothing. Brittany, Ross, and we do have our free educational Facebook group, Your Sourced Inventory. So it's, I can't even type while I'm doing it, but I think it's facebook.com/groups/your sourced inventory. Hopefully that works. So that's really, it's much more of an educational group. We also have a daily list service where we send out leads, and then we have like a higher education group where it's called YSI, Sourcing Insights. So that group is a paid one, but we give out, in addition to giving leads, we give out more in detail education on the topic. But the point is really that you're coming into a part of the year where shoes and clothing sell all year round, right? There's no question about that. In the summer, you have all the summer specific clothing. The winter, you have all the winter specific clothing. So when you're thinking about back to school, shoes are a big thing for back to school. Sneakers, things that your kids are going to be wearing, are very, very big. And understand though that these categories, the velocity is not going to look like health and personal care, right? Like how many pairs of shoes sell relative to how many tubes of toothpaste on a daily basis. It's fractional, but the velocity is still there. And in Q4, it's a big gift thing, especially the running shoes, the higher end stuff. And then you head into the beginning of the year where everybody's making their New Year's resolution to lose weight. So you have all the athletic clothing, and you have all the athletic shoes, you have all the stuff that sells very well into the end of the year, beginning of the year kind of stuff. So these are just things to be thinking about, to try and branch away from, like, if you're a newer seller and you started in the toys and you're like, I got to move on from this because it's just too crowded or there's too much clearance or things like that. Look for ways to really branch yourself out and kind of get, I wouldn't call it more niche-y, but away from some of the masses sometimes. Everyone has a different business model, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Each one fits every person the way they want it to. But there's a lot of times you find, the quintessential example of last year was the pie face example, right? So I think it peaked at like 700 sellers. 700 sellers sounds like a lot because it is a lot. I mean, that's a ton of sellers being on a listing. And it still ended up selling through, and people still made a fair bit of money on that game. But a lot of times you're just on a shoe, you're one of three. Why do you want to necessarily compete with one of 700 when you could be one of three? So these are kind of things to think about when you're trying to move away. And the same goes for even if you're going to go into like the home goods or different kinds of products like that. There's plenty of stuff where you don't have to be, one of 700, or you can be one of a whole lot less. So sorry, getting my kids sending me messages. So those are just, again, things to think about. Jim makes a point here that, I think we saw this last year a lot. And I think it's a really good point in terms of planning. And that is the transit times last year. I shouldn't say the transit times. The check-in times last year were pretty atrocious. So this is going to be a little bit complicated because the intention that Amazon has with these increased fees is that you send stuff in as you need. Well, last year, the biggest problem is you could send something in and it wouldn't be live on the site for weeks, literally weeks. They could get it and, it goes to one of these, redistribution centers, like AVP in Pennsylvania is one of those, right? It goes there and then they just send it out all over the country. And until it's actually landed in the right places, it's back ordered and you're kind of in the queue. And then it's got to check into this place and all these different things. So last year we saw a lot of it. It's hard to know how they're going to resolve what we saw last year because their client, their objective is, hey, don't have the facilities, their fulfillment centers overstuffed with stock because we're going to hit you with fees. So make sure your stuff is selling. But if stuff continues to take a long time to check in, it's a gamble because if you don't want it to be there by November 1st, you want it to hit the warehouse, let's say November 2nd, you may not be fully live for things you want to sell for people who are buying things for Thanksgiving. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but it's definitely a fair point that Jim makes, and that is that you're seeing the reshuffling a lot. They're trying to help you on one hand to kind of send it all to one place, and on the other hand, they're trying to get the inventory across the country so that they can always meet the deadlines of the consumer of the 2-day prime. So it's always a back and forth, but at some point you may have to say, hey, bite the bullet, get it in early, pay for the storage, because if you decide to try and stay cheap on the storage side, you may not be live in time and you may not get all the sales. So I think it's a good time to reflect on all these things. Here we are in August and you're thinking about, hey, what am I going to do? What do I want to be doing? How can I avoid the crowds or stay with the crowds. I did the following things last year and they worked really well. But look at the things that didn't work so well, right? It's very easy to remember our winners. Everybody wants to promote, oh yeah, I was awesome. I did this. Oh, I was on that. Oh, that was the hottest toy. I knew that. But take a look at the things that didn't work out so well. And I think going through your long-term storage, or at least your things that you have floating out there, is a good reality check into, what do I have hiding and what did I not do well? I think when I started looking in June at what I had and what I need to move, it was kind of interesting to me. There were probably a good 5 to 15 SKUs that I had that were, late holiday buys from last, Q4, either things I figured I'd wait out, like a Black Friday purchase that I said, oh, you know what, I'm not going to race to the bottom. I'll just ride it out. And, the supply was just too much for the demand. It just wasn't there. And every year I say, I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that. And if you don't write it down, you don't kind of have a game plan, you may not stick with it. And if you don't stick with it, then, it's kind of useless to have that plan because, you end up with the same mistakes. So, really, if you can document the things that you want to do differently, I think you'll find you'll be in a better position. The other thing that I've noticed over these years is Amazon buying stock, buying items that you expect Amazon to sell out of. And, you go through the Keep It chart, you're like, oh, they always stock out this. They always stock out this. One thing I would tell you is start to look at how long that stock out gap is. I've found that the amount of time that Amazon is in stock is growing, on a product that you think is just going to be hot or it's always hot. Let's take it the normal 1,000 ranked toy that's the whole year it's ranked, between 1 and 4,000, right? And you say, oh, Amazon's going to have to run out because they always run out. And you start to take a look at that. I think you'll find that they're doing a better job at forecasting. They're seeing the demand, they're knowing what's happening, and they're not running out as quickly or as historically as much as people think. And so again, you don't want to get stuck with that over retail play, right? You paid $19.99 thinking Amazon's going to sell out, and you're going to sell it for anywhere from 40 to 50 or 60 or more. And then next thing you know, you're paying these exorbitant fees to Amazon because they're new November, December fees, and you can't move this product because Amazon's just not selling out of it, or they've replenished or whatever it is. So think about your strategies now. Kind of think about the end of the year. What do you want to be doing? How do you want to be doing it? Because I think a lot of people get into the end of the year and it's like a flying by the seat of their pants. They're just, what are the trends? What should I do? All these things. And that kind of goes to flips and things like that, where I think, there's so many paid Facebook groups now, right? There's all this stuff out there. And I think a lot of it is great in terms of information. You want to have good information. You want to do good analysis. I'm a big research and analysis guy. And I'm a big believer in it. So, these groups to me, a lot of times are not necessarily about each and every flip per se. But it's, again, what I touched on a little bit earlier, and that is kind of learning from the things. So, if we think about this year, look at the movies, right? So they're going to drive a lot of the toy sales are going to be driven from the movie releases from this year. And it's kind of interesting because you want to look at the animated or kids movies that have come out over this past year and say, well, how have they done? How have the movies done? Well, it's actually in the office the other day, and CNBC had this whole piece on how the blockbuster movies box offices are down tremendously. I mean, I wish I remembered the stat and what the numbers were, but right now 2016 box office sales relative to the last 3 years is down more than 50%. So the movies are just not bringing people out this year, but it doesn't necessarily make the movies bad, and it doesn't actually translate into poor merchandise selling. So if you were like, hey, I went and I took my kids or my nieces and nephews or whomever, and we saw the Secret Life of Pets, and I thought that movie was bad or good, whatever you think, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the toys aren't selling, right? So immediately kind of go on to Amazon and see, well, how are the toys selling? Are the toys ranked, 90,000? Yeah, they're probably not moving too well. Are the toys ranked, 10,000 or less? Looks like, um, it's still moving. So think about the different things, like what's happened over this year in the news, right? So obviously it's a big election year. All these things can impact themes for the holidays. But I think there's just a lot of things where people just, they don't think about it now, right? You kind of get caught, hey, I wasn't paying attention, now what to do? So a lot of these groups, one of the helpful things in a lot of these groups is seeing the trends. People are noticing, well, this guy is, this kid show is hot. Hey, you didn't even know about it because you don't have kids or your kids are older, whatever it is. These are things where a lot of these groups are very helpful because they're at least giving you a thought process on that, right? Like, I mean, you can't miss the whole Pokemon Go thing in the world today, just because of how big and how crazy it has gotten. But again, think along those lines. What products will be there to monetize? Maybe nothing, maybe tons. Who knows? But these are things that you have to kind of to think about. Kind of putting the game plan together is definitely key, and really thinking through like why you want to do it. Again, some people's model is just like literally flip everything, right? If it makes me money, I'm a buyer. If it makes me money, I'm a buyer. I'm not a retail arb guy, and I know people who do it very successfully on many different levels. Mendy just showed up in the chat here, and he's spent, well, I don't know, the last couple of weeks retail arbing, but not in the traditional sense, right? You had Sports Authority going out of business, and he capitalized on that, right? I think he did his coaching hour last night. I think he talked about what he spent. So he's writing in the chat, he spent 42,000 at Sports Authority in 3 days. Didn't listen to the show, don't know some of the stuff. I did speak to him about it, so I know some of the items and the strategies he used to buy. Daniel asked, is it shoes? And I'm pretty sure most of it was not shoes. It was other product. But shoes are going to sink. No. Yes, that is true. So Mendy says that every store had cleats, which is very true. I actually took my two sons one of the last nights here. We went to see if there was any fines for them, and actually we got them cleats. Yeah, so for like $6, we were able to get them a new pair of cleats. But I don't think shoes were on Mendy's list. It looks like he said no. So I think there are ways to do retail arb in different ways. But if you're going to do it, again, be thinking along the lines of what kind of fits your plan, so that I think if you go through your inventory now, whether you have fees or not, I think some of your stuff that's stuck will tell you a lot of things that you don't want to be doing again, right? Like, you made that mistake, don't make that same mistake. So going along the lines of everything we've been talking about, you really just want to be heading in a slightly different direction, right? So if everyone is always doing toys, or everyone is always doing clearance, or whatever it is, think about, how do I not do that? What can I do differently? And then how can I capitalize on that? I think a really good example of this is gift cards, right? I'd been using discounted gift cards for a number of years. And now that has really come to the forefront of a lot of people's businesses, right? What what has happened, if you look, some of the stores that you may have always wanted to get gift cards from and you were always able to get gift cards from, you may not be able to anymore, because the demand has picked up. The supply has been the same, but the demand has picked up because more and more sellers are doing it that way. So it's time to adjust and move on. Now, that being said, there's been a lot of complaints, I know, in the overall marketplace of gift cards where they're finding like the balances aren't right, or they expire, or you bought it so far in advance, and then when it comes due, the money's not there, and then the gift card selling site won't take it back because it's not inside 30, 60, 90, 100 days, whatever it is. So again, these are things that like do things differently. And if you see everyone moving that way, you may have to adjust your model accordingly. Mendy also brings up the point that everyone goes to ASD, so he spent the week at a different show, which is very true. You know, like I did not go to either ASD this year. And I think there's lots of good things that happens at these shows, but there's also lots of other shows. Like, don't always necessarily follow the trend. And last week, Dan and Eric talked about how they've built their whole business not going to shows. Now, I'm not per se saying that that's the only way to do it, but their point is, it was huge. It was a really good point, and that was, you don't need to go to the shows, or at least to the shows that everyone's going to build your business. Whether you want to get into wholesale or not, there's ways to kind of make relationships, have relationships with big suppliers that don't require you necessarily to go to the show. So a lot of times people like the face-to-face interaction, but you can make that secondary after you've kind of made the beginning of a working relationship with them on the phone or email or what have you. So I think there's always ways to make this business work, which is what's super unique about it, that Dan and Eric have their business model, it works for them. Andy Slamans has his business model and it works for him. Sam Cohn, who, again, all these are the people that have had on the show these last, bunch of weeks. They all have different businesses and different models. And he's another one. He has a very different model than all those guys. Some people love the closeout. Some people love, just kind of going to the stores. They like doing that. I saw a discussion recently on, if you could just do one thing, what would it be? Would you just always shop, or would you kind of move on from this if you inherited money? And these are things to think about when you think about why you're doing this and how you're running your business. Is this a job or is this a business? If it's a job, you really want to think about like how you can slowly remove yourself from this. In our free group, our Your Source Inventory group, someone asked about tonight. There was a question about like one of these folding, like when you have a shirt in the store, like a lot of times they like fold it on like this cardboard thing and it makes it look nice and pretty. So you go into a retail store, you'll see a lot of the sales associates are folding on this thing. So they said, does anyone use this and, to help make their, folding easier and nicer? And I responded, 2 words: prep center. I don't touch that stuff. That's not something that has any interest in me, and it's leverageable and it's outsourceable. So many things are outsourceable, and I've talked about this many times, and this is how I've really grown my business, and that is, don't be involved in everything. You don't need to be, and you shouldn't be. It's not a good use of your time. And if you look at what you're actually making on an hourly basis, if you're spending too much time doing little tasks that somebody else can, you're never going to be able to truly kind of bust through and grow. I'm not saying you need employees. I'm not saying you have to have a warehouse. I don't have, technically either. But you look at the people who kind of broke through the barrier, whatever that barrier was, whether it's $1,000 a week, whether it's, or a month, 10,000 a month, 100,000 a month, they had to do something bigger. They had how to leverage something. I think it's one of these things where if you're the bottleneck, it's time to remove yourself. So if space in your house is the bottleneck, it shouldn't be there. You don't have time to do something, get someone else to do it. Otherwise, you're just kind of like going to get stuck all the time. You're going to find yourself in a position where you've run around buying all these items to send in and it's sitting in your house and it's Q4 and it's not selling, or you didn't reprice it because nobody took the time to kind of upload the file and do a bulk reprice or whatever it is. All these things are kind of, things that you want to be thinking about, especially as you head into this part of the year, because this is really where there's a lot more money to be made. If you're focused on, Q4, you can make great money the whole year. Like, you can not rely on Q4, but if you are, then you really need to go in with the proper planning. And it, again, doesn't have to be the same as everyone else. It just needs to have an executable plan. I think Maureen Brenner put out like I wouldn't call it a guide, but she has something about, it even talks about how to plan for family meals. Years ago, she put it out, and it really is like, okay, we freeze the food, we do this, we do that. Now, maybe you need to do that, maybe you don't. But the point is like, she was very disciplined in how she kind of thought about things, and you don't want to find yourself like very unsure what to do. So, someone in the chat is saying that, he didn't have the time, but he didn't have the space to pack stuff, right? So it limits you on the space. You're also saying if you're not good at it, you shouldn't be doing it, which is very true. I mean, whether you think you're the best box packer or not, doesn't really matter, because someone else can do that. You don't want, if you're not comfortable yet outsourcing your purchasing, I get that, or your relationships at the stores or your wholesalers, I get that. But to start moving out the tasks, there's something to be said about that. I mean, I think I have not used it yet. I actually was gonna start to look at what people are saying about the OA X-ray guys came out with the refund X-ray, I think it's called. So I haven't looked at that tool yet. Dwayne had looked and started testing AMZ Suite, and I think he ended up, I don't know if he stuck with it. I'm not really sure. I tested that and I stopped after a little bit because I wasn't really sure if it fit for me. But these are easy things to kind of, make sure you're getting the refunds, that you don't want to sit there and be going through all these reports in your back end and knowing, oh yes, I got that return. How much time it takes to actually notice that you were charged for the refund and then the product didn't come back 45 days later. So then you have to submit the case. These are definitely leverageable things. And there's services out there, but there's also, you can train a VA. There are other sellers who may really be into that stuff. It's kind of like your accounting. You can outsource that. All these things are very leverageable. And that's really what you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about what part of your businesses can be outsourced and leveraged so that you can kind of grow. And that's really where a lot of these lists and paid groups come in, because again, they're time leverage. They're things where it's not like, hey, someone sends you a list and you buy everything on the list. That's kind of stupid. But it gives you a starting point to know, for something to look at. And the same with the groups. It's intel, it's information flow, where they're thinking about things that you may or may not have thought about, simply because they're just different people, and different people are going to have different point of views and different things that they can kind of focus on. Someone in that group may know a lot about makeup or beauty trends, the things that people are eating totally differently now because the whole world has gone, away from gluten, or they only want whole foods, or they want all these different things that you may know nothing about because you in your life, that doesn't impact you, or that has no interest to you. So that's what these groups are doing. It's not just networking, it's networking of ideas and different thoughts. And again, it kind of puts you in a different direction where, there are plenty of people who are very creative and, some people who are not. I'm much more of an analytical person. Someone sent me a buy today. They're like, hey, I want to do this. What do you think? They're like, I think it's really, really great. And I looked at it and I'm like, nope, I don't. Here's why. And, this is what this is telling me. And I don't think so. And I said, it was actually on the bus, so I couldn't do the ton of research, but all the tools I had with me on my phone told me that this is not something that would interest me, and here's why. And I immediately gave them the reasons. So it's something that kind of comes to me, right? The analytic side. But whereas the creative side of, hey, there's this, homemade basket that people are really into. Should we go and create a new listing and things like that? That's not something that, I'd have really good insight into, because it doesn't really fit me or my business or who I am, on a day-to-day basis. So kind of know what you want to do, or at least have a sense of which way you want to be going, because again, this is the time where you want to have everything beginning to be in place. The other things for the back half of the year is, we talked about this earlier on, but holidays. So Halloween is a huge holiday. If you were thinking about getting into costumes and things like that, wholesale accounts are probably late. I would say, August is probably the latest time you want to be making those orders, if you can still get orders. But again, these are big things where forget the candy for a second, or even forget the costumes for a second. There's other things, right? Like now, every holiday has lights, like whatever. It's like the craziest thing. There's always, people putting lights on their house for different things. Halloween, maybe in your neighborhood doesn't do that, but in other parts of the country it does. So look at what people do for Halloween. You can even just Google Halloween trends or something to that effect, and see where things are going. So again, try and start to think outside of what you normally do, so that you have different perspectives. Like my daughter didn't come back, but she literally, when she heard that I was going to be, doing the show tonight, she wanted me to kind of go through the Toys R Us, where did it say, I don't know, make back to school. So she literally had kind of gone through, and she was like, well, I like this, I like that. And it's a different perspective, right? I may or may not agree with her. That's why I put her on in the beginning. I promised her she can go on. But she was trying to tell me, and it was really cute, was one of these, I think it was down here, this Shopkin one. So she's like, oh, there's your girl. You can't even see, because she's, to her point, it was a little bit blurry, but there is, I think that was like, it's one of the Shopee girls. I don't know if it's Bubblicious or Popette or who knows what. But they came out with 6 more characters. The Shopkins came out with more dolls. So her point was, now the Shopkins are going to be making the people, and I like the people as much as I like Shopkins. She has tons of Shopkins. She's like, I really like the people. Well, do kids really like the people? If you have a little daughter who says she does, then she may be the perfect candidate to know. Relative to my knowledge, like, what's the difference, right? Like, you have the doll, or you have the little bottle of shampoo with the face, who knows? But to her, it makes a difference. She likes it. So, again, the groups, the networking, the thoughts, the trends on Google are all just different ways to be thinking outside of where you're normally at. Mendy's point was something that I had been saying earlier on, is kind of going in a different direction. Thinking about these next, 5 months or so, you have the entire August, you have September, October, November, and December, thinking about like, hey, maybe I want to make a complete change. Last year I did X, Y, and Z, and it worked really well. So let's keep that. I also did A, B, and C, and it didn't really work out so well. So I'm not going to do A, B, and C. If you thought that last year you were going to make a ton of money on Black Friday, and then you look and see you didn't make a penny, or you lost money, that's probably going to happen again. The odds of you getting something better this time is unlikely. All right, so plan differently. If you sold, trying to give examples without just like throwing out everybody's items, but like if you sold blenders last year and it did really well, assume that it will do almost as well, because there'll probably be a little bit more competition. But if you sold the hot toy, whether it was like my example earlier, Pie Face, it's not going to do well again, right? Like that was just a trend. So, pick up on going through your inventory of what is repeatable, in the sense of what can you go out and buy it again now and it'll do well again, and what's not going to be repeatable. And typically you should be able to look at your inventory and know what was what, and not just kind of like hope for the best on that. You should be able to have like a true game plan. So those were really the topics I wanted to cover. I think I hit them all. I will say, having hosted this show now for Dwayne for a bunch of weeks, when you have the questions, when people are asking you questions, it's so much easier to kind of talk. When you have a guest and you can have an interaction and communication, it's also easier. When you have, talking to people, but there's like topics, but it's not conversational, it's definitely more challenging. So Dwayne's not here and he's probably not listening to any of these, which is good. But it definitely changes my perspective on how he does it every week. Diana, I think I'm still doing this probably another week. I haven't talked to Dwayne this week because he was in Vegas at the shows. So he was in a different time zone and probably up and asleep at completely different hours because of hanging out with the young guns. I do expect Brittany and I are going to do a shoe and clothing show. I just don't know when that is. I don't think it's going to be next week, but we were going to do a whole show dedicated to shoes and clothing, and potentially even trying to see if I can do some buy analysis, because that's the one thing when I talk, it's not as easy to kind of do a whole analytic thing without a screen share or something like that. So we'll see. Susie, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's been great, and I'm definitely not, to my knowledge, I think I'm doing this next week, but I haven't talked to Dwayne because at some point I think he's going to want to be done with vacation because I think his kids are going back to school soon now as well. Yeah, so Diana, in the free Facebook group, we kind of talk about it a little bit. I try and break down some buys. I haven't done it a lot because the truth of the matter is I do it in our paid Facebook group, usually at least one a day. So, but at the same time, like I would like to be able to kind of do the show with Brittany and potentially, kind of break down some buys and go through things. But, if anyone has any other questions in the chat, I can definitely try and address them now. Otherwise, we're about on an hour and covered all the things I was going to talk about. So I will shut it down if no one else has any other questions, comments, questions. No. All right. So I forgot to give Gompers his fist bump. So if he listened to it, then he'll get it at the end. There's a question here. How much of inventory is replenishable? So I don't know who this is because it has like a username as opposed to an actual name, but I'm sitting in for Dwayne Malik. I am actually REA Scheinbein, but I have a decent amount of items that are replenishable. I think Dwayne used to be more replenishable, but I think his business model has changed as well. I could talk about that more at another time because getting into like breaking down my inventory, which Dwayne does a lot more of, would take more than like the 1 or 2 minutes. So we'll try and address that another time. All right. I am glad everyone enjoyed. I appreciate everybody for joining, and we will post the replay once Dwayne gets that up. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining, and have a great night. I'll say goodnight to my daughter, sure.